I will explain to you the lists in Python. Until now, we have been using variables. Each variable keeps only one data, but a list keeps a collection of data. So you can put in a list multiple data, but a variable at any one time can only have one single value. So the difference between lists and variables is that lists contain a number of values. It's a collection of data. How do we create a list? We can create a list in two ways, either by using the square bracket notation, or we can use the list function. The list function is used to create a list from other things, other objects. If you just put nothing between square brackets, then it will create an empty list. If you don't put any parameter in the list function, we will again create an empty list. And then later on, we can add elements to a list. So at the beginning, we can create an empty list. We can start with an empty list, and then we can add elements afterwards. One important thing is that if we use the list function, for example, we shouldn't use anywhere in our program a variable named list. Here I have a variable named list equal to 77. I print the list, it will print 77 as it is seen here. When I try to run this program, now I get an error to this line. Why? Because I've used a variable which has name list, and I'm using this same thing here. So if you use a variable with name list, you cannot use the function list. Okay, so please don't use any variable like this. Okay, so it's not suggested to use any variable which has the same name with a function. Since list is a function, is a list function, if we use a variable name as list, then I'm not able to use anymore the list function. This is just something to remember. Sorry, let's go here. Let's comment out this region. How can I create a list? I can create a list by using square brackets. Between square brackets, I can put a number of values. They can be either all integers, all float values, or strings, or we can also have a mixture of them. Let's run this program. Then it will, I have created this list here, but I can also have, for example, 25.76. I have now one value which is not integer, or I can even have an element which has a string, Alibaba, comma, and then my list has some integers, a string, some float values, etc. A list may contain a mixture of different data types. So don't be prejudiced to have only the same data type. A list in Python may have a mixture of data, of different data types. When we print a list using just a print, it just prints the square brackets as well. There are some explanations here. One important thing is that if I create a list, for example, I have list 1 here, and then I assign this list to another object, list 2, another list variable. Let's print the list 2, sorry. So it will be printing the same thing, okay? List 1 and list 2 are same. In Python, in order to add an element to a list, we use the append method. Here, this means to list 1, append a new element which has the value 10. So when we have this list name, here list 1 is our initial list, that append will create a new element in this list with this value. Okay, so 10 is added to the list with this. But here I printed not list 1 but list 2. Okay, here I have list 1. I assigned list 1 to list 2. Now both are the same list. And here I added one element to list 1, but I printed list 2. When I printed the list 2, I see that the 10 is also in list 2. And then here I am appending to list 2 the value 84, and I print list 1, not list 2. And I see that 81 exists in the list 1 as well. Why? Because when I assign a list to another list, there is only one occurrence of the list, but there are two variables that refers to the same one single list. Okay, so if you want to create a new list, this is not a way of doing it. If you assign, it will not create a new list with the same elements. It will point, it will refer to the same list. There is a function we will see in the future. It is copy. If I want to get a copy of the first list, then I just will say that copy. Then this will give me a new list which has the same values, but it will be a different list for this one. If I do this, I see that list 1 doesn't have 10. After appending list 1, 10, the value 10 to list 1 and print list 2, I see that list 2 is that one still. And if I append 84 to list 1, the 84 will not be at the end of the list 1 because list 2 equal list 1 dot copy will create a new list, and list 1 and list 2 will be two different lists. Otherwise, if I do this, if I just do that, list 2 is equal to list 1, there will be only one single list, and both list 1 and list 2 will be two names to the same single list. Okay, you have to remember this. It's not too important, but sometimes it helps. So after creating a list, we have learned that by using the append method, we can append new elements to the list. What we can do with lists? First of all, we can get the number of elements in a list. Now I will switch to this one. Here I have an empty list. I can create an empty list by using just square bracket, open square bracket, close square bracket without any element between, or by just using list function with no parameter. They will be both empty lists. Here I have my empty lists either created with this or that. If I want to create a list, I just put square brackets and put some values. By the way, here you see that there are 4 repeating twice and also 7 is repeated. So a list may contain duplicate values. Okay. If I print a list, it will print a list, and as we see, 7 occurs twice and 4 occurs twice as well. Let's put another 4 here. So there will be value 4 will happen 3 times in the list. The len function for strings gives the number of characters in a string, and the len function for lists gives the number of elements in the list. The principle is same. Len gives me how many elements are there in a list. So, and the len list 1 will give you the number of elements in a list. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So when I run this program, I will see that the number of elements is 9. Okay, length of the list is 9, or number of elements in the list is 9. So len is the most frequently used function with lists. It gives us the number of elements in a list. Also, while creating a list, we can have some expressions. What will happen after putting 7 to 8? It will compute this expression. We'll find a value, and that value will be the 4th element in this list. Since there is a plus and asterisk, multiplication has precedence over plus. Therefore, 2 times 5 will be done first, and then the result, which is 10, will be added to 2. Okay, so the result will be 12. As we see, it's somewhere here, wherever it is. Length of the list. Here we have 12. Okay. As I said, we can have a mixture of data types in a list. There is no problem with that. Why do we use list? We can just create a list using square brackets. We use the list to create a list from other sequences. For example, the range 8 produces numbers from 0 to 7. When I put this in a list, it will create a list of those values. Okay, so the values produced by range can be converted to a list by using the list function. List as a parameter, I use the range function. The range function produces 0 to 7. When the parameter is 8, then it will create a list which contains values from 0 to 7. By the way, the elements in a list are ordered. Okay. Here I have another range, 20, 9, minus 2. Start with 20, go up to 9, excluding 9, of course, by modifying every time the value by minus 2. So the values will be 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, and 10. The next value, 8, is below 9, so it will stop there. So I have created with this list function, which has as parameter a range function. The values produced by the range are put in a list. Okay. Then by using the append method, we can add new elements to a list. Here we see range 10, 21, 2, which will produce a list using 10 to 20, including 21, excluding, with increments of 2. So I have with this line 31, I have created this list, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20. And with this print, I have printed that line. Here we are appending 4 to the list. What happens? This value is appended to the end of the list. So the last element will be 4 when we print it. Or we append 32, then we append 7, and then we print the list for again. We see that 32 is appended, and then 7 is appended. So after these 2 lines, 2 new elements are added to the end of the list. And when we print the list, we see that those values are also in the list. So far, we have seen only the append method and also the len function to get the list. But len is a function which gets a list as parameter, but append is a method which is used with a list. If I say list4.append, it will append that value to the end of this list. If I have, for example, my list.append 77, this value 77 will be appended to the end of the my list. Okay. So whatever is the list that you use, the list name is here, then that value is appended to that list. Indexing. The indexing with lists are almost same with the indexing with strings. That's I've printed here list again. Here, list indexing. And then when we say list4 with index 0, it will be, of course, the first element. The first element has index 0. And index -1 is used for the last element. Okay. So here we have printed first element, and then with list4 0, we printed 10 here. And here we printed last element on screen, and with list4, which is the name of our list, -1 is the index. Index -1 refers to the last element. The last element is 7, so it is printed. If I want to print any other element, I just give the index value and start with 0, goes up to 1 less than the length. If the number of elements in a list is 10, the indexes are from 0 to 9, of course. Okay. since the index starts with 0, the index of the last element is 1 less than the number of elements. If there are 25 elements, last index is 24. So instead of printing with -1, what I can do, I can just copy this line. Instead of -1, I can say len of list 4, get the length, -1 is the index of the last element. Okay. So I get the same result. But -1 is easier to write, of course. So let's here build a loop that prints all elements using the indexes. Print elements accessed by index. Let's say I will write a for loop. IDX, I will use the variable IDX for index in range. Since the indexes start with 0, here I will just put len of list 4. Okay. Because len of list 4 will give it the number of elements in the list. And when I use the range function in for loop, it will produce the values from 0 up to this value, this parameter in range, except itself. If I have range 10, it will produce values from 0 to 9. If I have range 24, it will produce values from 0 to 23. So for any list, this will produce the correct indexes. So let's put here print, for example, list 4 with index IDX, and let's put afterwards just and equal just 2 spaces. Okay, I will print 2 spaces, or let's put a comma and a space. And of course, after finishing this, I will have an empty print, because with this one and equal comma and space, it will stay on the same line. When this loop is finished, I want to go to the beginning of the next line, to a new line, so I just print a new an empty print. Let's run this. Elements accessed by index. You see, let's print the, yeah, here we have list 4, which is this list. Okay. Sorry. Here we have printed them 10, comma, blah, 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 blah. Of course, since we have been printing comma and space after every element, after the last element as well, we have printed comma and space. Let's put 2 dash, and you will see it here. Okay. So we can use a for loop in this format to access each element by using indexes. But there are a nicer way of doing it. Okay. What is it? Let's do it here. Looping it is the next one. Here I have my list printed, but here I have a for loop. In the in part, I have the name of the list. So what happens? This loop will repeat for every element of the list 4 stored into variable v. So the first time in this loop, the first element of list 4 will be taken, stored into v. It will do the body of the for loop. Next time it will take the second element, put into v, do inside, third element into v, do inside, etc. So for every element of the list 4, v will get the value of the element and the loop will repeat. Okay. Let me do something similar to this one. Instead of printing, I will do some other thing. Control C. For example, I want to find the total of all elements. Total equals 0. Here, what will I do? total plus equal v and print total. So here what I'm doing, I created a new variable total which has value 0. For every element of list 4, take that element input into v and repeat this statement. So every element of list 4 will be added to total, and at the end it will be printed. Okay, let's say sum of the list, sum of the elements of the list. Let's run this and let's see the program's output. Sum of the elements of the list is 133. So it seems that all the values add up to this value. Okay. Is this understood? If you want to process every element of the list, you can either use a loop that uses indexes, or you can use just a loop with the list name in the in part, and then each element will be taken, put into that variable here at the for loop, and the loop will repeat. Indexing, adding. Okay, how do I modify elements? Here we have added some elements by using append, but I want to modify, for example, one of the elements. Assume that I want to modify this element 14 to something else. Okay. Before slicing, let's take this, put here. Access by index, looping indexes. Before accessing this, I will just do modify element, Control C. Modify element. How do I modify element? I use indexing. You cannot do this with strings. With strings, you cannot change any character of a string by using indexing, but in lists, you can modify an element by using indexing. So I have my list for list, modify this 14, okay, this 14 to something else. So let's make it, for example, minus 14, okay. So what I will do, what is the index of this one? Since indexes start with 0, this has index 0, index 1, index 2. So this has index 2 is equal to, I want to put, not, let's say 77. Okay, instead of 14, I will put 77. And let's print this 4. And put here after modification. Let's see the result. After modification, here we see the list. Now the third element with index 2 is not 14 anymore. It was 14 before, but now it is 77. So by using indexing at the left-hand side of an assignment operator, we can modify that value. Assume I want to modify not to 77, but I want to add, for example, 10 to this value. So what I will do, plus equal 10. So this element, the element with index 2 of list 4, will be increased by 10. So instead of 14, it will be 24. Okay, let's run this. Here, after modification, we see that the third element became 24. It was 14, now it is 24. So by using indexed element to at the left-hand side of an assignment, we can modify an element of a list. I will do something else. Equal some string. Okay. Of course, I will have here some error. I cannot add this string to total, but anyway, before that, after modification, we see that that element, this integer element 14, is replaced by a string. Okay, so you can do this kind of operations. The new element need not be the same as the same type. Here, before this line 50, the element with this index 2 was 14, an integer number, but now I have put a string instead. So the second element has been modified to be a string. Let's change this to 24. Okay. So the program will not have any error. Or I can put 24.8. It will still run correctly. After the modification, where it is, after modification, the second element became 24.8, but the sum will have become this. Okay. So in order just to do a quick summary of what we have seen, we can create an empty list by using square brackets, or by just using an empty with no parameter, a list function call with no parameter. Or we can create a list by just using some values separated by comma between square brackets. Or we can create a list by using the list function either from a range or another sequence. There are other sequence operators, but we know range anyway. Range 8 will produce values from 0 to 7. Range 29 and -2 will produce values 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, and 10, etc. So by using the list function, we can create a list from a given sequence. We can add elements by using the append. It always adds to the end. Okay. There are some functions related with, oh, by the way, deleting an element. When we want to delete an element, then we can just say del space and the element index, element with index. List1, 2 will remove the element with index 2 in list1 from the list1 list. Okay. Or -1 will remove the last item. Because in -1 is the index of the last element. Therefore, del, the list name, whatever it is, list1 with -1 as index, will remove the last element. So we have seen len function. We have seen the list function to create a list from a sequence. We have some other functions that can be used with lists. Max with a name with the list will give me the maximum value in the list. Here we have that part. Sum will give me the sum of all elements in a list if they are all numbers. Okay. If there are some strings, the sum function will not work. Everything should have to be either integer or float number. Max will give me the maximum value. In this case, all elements of list 4 have to be either numbers or have to be all strings. If they are all strings, it will give me the maximum string, lexically maximum string. And similarly, min function will give me the minimum of the elements in a given list. When we run this, that's looping lists. I will erase some parts of this. Okay, let's run again. I will come to list slicing later on. Functions, the sum gives me the sum of all values in the list. Maximum will give you the maximum. 32 is maximum among all these values, and 4 is the minimum among all these values in the list. So sum, max, and min functions, gives us the sum, the maximum, and the minimum values in a list. When we use this, of course, we cannot use a variable which has the name sum. If I have, for example, a variable sum equal to 7 blah blah blah, if I have this, then this I will get an error here, okay? Because sum is already the name of a variable. Therefore, I'm not able to use anymore the sum function. If I do this, I will get an error here, okay? So please, in your programs, if you are using the sum function, don't use any variable named sum. If you are using the max function, don't use any variable with name max. Or if you are using min function or sorted function, don't use any variable which has name min or sorted. What sorted does, it creates a new list in which the elements are sorted in ascending order. If we do that, when we look here, functions, sorted list, here is my original list, list 4 is printed here. And here is sorted list 4, 7, 10, 12, blah, blah, blah. All elements are sorted or ordered in ascending order, okay? But list 4 is printed afterwards, it is not modified. So sorted just creates a new list in which all the elements of the given list are sorted. Slicing. Slicing with lists are very similar to slicing with strings. But there is again one difference between list slicing and string slicing. As we have seen a little bit up, when we want to modify an element, we use indexing. We cannot modify a character of a string using indexing, okay? With strings, indexing is only used to get a character from a string. It cannot be used to modify a character in a string. But in lists, indexing can be used to modify elements. Similarly, with list slicing, we can also modify elements of a list. We can get elements. The getting part is exactly the same with string slicing. If, for example, if I have 2,7 to colon 7, it will just give me all elements with starting index 2 up to index 6. 7 is excluded, okay? So all elements from index 2 to 6 is taken by slicing with 2 colon 7. 7 is excluded, so it will go from 2 up to 6. So here we will see those elements, okay? Or -4 is the fourth element to the from the end. -4 colon and nothing. If I have in slicing, let me open here. Where is my 5? Okay, let me create a new. If I have, for example, let me make this font bigger. If I have slicing LST or list 4 is my list, and I have something here, column, and something here. If there are only 2 elements in a slicing, in either in string slicing or list slicing, they are exactly the same, principle is the same. If I leave the first one empty, it means the start. So writing it, for example, if I have, for example, only 8 here and nothing here, this will be exactly the same with having 0 and 8, okay? These two are identical. If I leave the, oops, sorry, what I want to do is, if I leave the second one is empty, for example, from 4 to nothing, if the second parameter is empty in slicing, it means go to the end. Take the last element as well. Okay, start with index 4 and take all the elements till the end of the list, including the last element. So if the first one is empty, it means the beginning. If the second one is empty or nothing, it means the end of the list. Okay, including that last element as well. So 4, nothing, it will start with index 4, will take all elements till the end of the list, including the last element. Empty column 8 will start from the beginning. It will take all the elements from the beginning of the list until the element with index 8 exclusive. So index 7 will be inclusive. It will take the first 8 elements of the list. Index with 0 up to index with 7 will be taken here. So here, if I have 3 parameters, something here, and then some increment. If I have here, for example, 2, start from the beginning. If I leave this empty and the second one also empty, this is all then equivalent to having 0 at the beginning. Okay, start with the first element and each time increase the index by 2. So which elements will be taken here? The elements with index 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, blah, 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 blah. These indexes will be processed, will be taken. So if I have this will give me the elements with even indexes. Assume that I want to have the element with indexes. Okay, indexes, I want to get odd indexes. Which are, what are the odd indexes? 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, blah, blah, blah. How do I do this? I increment again by 2. But I start with index 1. 1, colon, no second parameter, and 2 will get the odd indexes of the elements with odd indexes in this list. Okay. This part is exactly the same with string indexing, string slicing. If I have a negative value as increment instead of a positive increment, 2, 3, 5, 7, whatever, if I have a negative increment, let's say list for with what I will do, I will go here. Okay. This is more readable, I think. So if I have, for example, something and -1. So in this case, it goes backwards. Okay. If I have nothing, and -1, the first one will be the last character, the last element, sorry, the last element. The second one will be the first element. So this, because the increment is negative. When the increment is negative, it goes in the reverse direction from the end to the beginning. So this is the reverse of the list. This gives me nothing, -1 in slicing gives me the reverse. Or if I have, for example, list 4 with 8, 12, -1, what will happen? It will get the elements with indexes 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, not 9, 9. Because, sorry, I made a mistake. So I apologize. 12 and 8. I should write it like that. If the increment is negative, sorry, forget the previous one. If the increment is negative, the first index must be greater than the second index. So it will start with 12. So every time change the index by -1. So the taken values, the elements from the list is taken with these indexes, index 12, 10, 11, 10, and 9. When it comes 8, the second parameter is always exclusive. We don't take it. Okay, those elements, the elements with indexes 12, 11, 10, and 9 will be taken. If I have here, for example, 4 and -2, what will be the indexes? Start with 12, then next change by -2, 10, then 8, then 6, then next one is 4, but 4 is excluded. Okay, so these will be the elements with those indexes will be taken in this order. First, the element with index 12, then the element with index 10, then the element with the index 8, and then 6. Because the lists are ordered. The order is important. You cannot just mix the order. If in this, let's go here to our program. Here, if in my list I have, for example, 10 is the first element, I may have here a 7 and another 7. This 7, if there is a 7 here, it will have index 3, 0, 1, 2, and 3, and this will have index 8. Okay, the same value may repeat, or even the same value doesn't repeat. It's not important. Every element has a fixed index, and the element with index 4 is 18, element with index 3 is 16, etc. So they are ordered. A list is an ordered sequence of values. So we cannot, when we have this, assume that the list is something like that, list 4 is equal to, let's create a list with list function, list range 1, 21. So which values will be taken with range 1, 21, starting from 1 up to 20. Therefore, my list will have a sequence of values from 1 to 20. Okay. So this will create, let's put this, let's take this in a program and run it in a program. I will do it somewhere here. So let's go, let's change this. Of course, let's put here a comment. X is equal to this, and print first list 4, and then print X. Okay, I only have these executable lines here. Here is on top, I have my initial list. It has 20 values. The index of this one is 0. The index of the second element is 1. The index of the third element, which has value 3 by here, has index 2. So index 12 has value 11. Sorry, index 12 has value 13. This has value index 0. So every element has a value which is one more than its index. 13 is at index 12. So index 12, index 9, 10, index 8, and index 6. Okay. Because this will take index, start with index 12. Each time change index by -2. from index 12 go to index 10, then 8, then 6. But since the values are one more than their index, index 0 has value 1, index 1 has value 2, etc. So we'll get these elements of the list. They are in this order. Now, if I just print x index 2, what's it? Index 0, index 1, index 2, 9. It will print 9. Okay. So this may be a quiz question, for example. I can give this program and I can say, I can just remove this to, what is the output? What is the output? The output is 9. Okay. You have to know the slicing and you have to know indexing. Okay. This will measure your slicing knowledge and your indexing knowledge. The question can be something like that. What is the output of this program? Then you will just write 9 in the box. So let's continue with things. Operators. We can concatenate two lists. If I have a list, two lists, let's assume that I have, for example, have two lists. Let's go to the program. Let's create here, I have my X list, and let's create another list. Y is equal to, let's put some values, 7, 24, 1, and 5. Let's print, we have already printed X, and let's print Y. Assume I have a new list, Z is equal to X plus Y. What will happen? X is a list, Y is a list. X plus Y will create a new list in which all elements of X will be taken and then all elements of Y will be taken. Okay. So when we print Z, we will see that it is like that. Here is my X, here is the list Y, and here is the list Z. 13, 11, 9, 7 are taken first from X, okay? And then 7, 24, 1, 5 are added to that list to create a new list. So we can use the plus operator to create a new list from two other lists. Okay, list X and list Y are concatenated, and a new list is created, and it's assigned to Z. And last, W is equal to X multiplied by 2. What will happen? Print W. Let's print first. Let's print X first to see X and W together. Here you see this is X and this is W. When I multiply by a value, that list is repeated. Okay, all elements are repeated again and again. If I have instead of 2, 5, then I will get a longer list than those 4 elements of the original list, 13, 11, 9, 7, are repeated again and again. How many times? 5 times. Okay. So we have list operators plus to concatenate and get a new list from two lists, or asterisk to produce a list with repeated elements of the multiplied list. It can be list multiplied by 5 or 5 multiplied by list. It's the same thing, okay? The result doesn't change. So the number can be first argument and the list can be second argument, or vice versa. In operator, in operator checks if a value with if statement, if A in fruits. Fruits has apple, banana, cherry, dewberry, egg fruit. I have in variable A cherry. If A in fruits returns true or false. If this thing, this variable, the value of this variable exists in the list, the in structure returns true. Otherwise, it returns false. If cherry is in the list, it will return true. Is it here? Yes, it exists. So it will print this. If it was instead of cherry, it was cherry 2. Is there this string inside the list? No, it will go to the else part. Attention, we have here in our program. Let me go here. For v in list, here again we used in, but with a for loop. Here it doesn't check for existence. It just repeats the for loop with every element of list for taken into v. But if I have, for example, if v in list 4, then I should have blah blah print. Let's print yes. Example. Then I have to have here some v value. Okay, put any value 88. There is a major difference between this v in list 4 and this v in list 4 because this is in a for loop, which means that take every element of list 4, put into the variable v, and repeat the body of the loop. But here it checks, does the value of v exist in list 4? If it exists, then it gives true. If it doesn't exist, it gives false. It doesn't repeat this. Not a for loop, this is an if statement. And here I have a logical expression. The value of, I can put here just 88 if I wish, okay? But usually in a program, you will have some variable there. So there is a major difference between this statement, if v in list 4, or that statement for v in list 4. This will be a for loop repeating for every element of list 4 stored into v and repeating the body of the statement. But here it will return either true or false. If the value of that variable exists in the list, it will return true. If it doesn't exist, it will return false. So we can use in operator to check if an item exists in a list. I've explained slicing. Okay, I will finish my lecture here. We have seen append, and I will explain the others tomorrow evening. Tomorrow morning in your lab, you have questions related with lists, but I don't think you need anything from here. So I've made the lab questions so that by the knowledge that you have learned today, you can solve easily the questions. Okay. Oh, by the way, one thing before finishing, I have to explain something that will be very useful in tomorrow's lab. Let me do it here. Here, let's say I have 1, 2, and let's change this 10 to 200 with the increment of 12, for example. Okay. LST. Now, not 12, let's say 7. I will just explain one thing and then I will finish it. Here we have some values, okay? Now, I will create a list from the values in this list, but by only taking the values which are divisible by 5. 45 is divisible by 5. Let's go further. 80 is divisible by 5, etc. Okay. So how can I do that? LST2, I start with an empty list. Okay. Then for each element, for V in LST, for each element of this list, what I do, I check if V is divisible by 5. Okay. If the value taken from the list, this for loop will take each element of LST, put into V, and perform the body of the for loop. If that element taken from list, which is in V, is divisible by 5, what I will do, I will append it to LST2. Neredesin? Ders veriyorum. Baksana hoca geldi. Sorry guys, the door rang. So now let's run this and let's see the output. As you see, 45 and then 80 and then further we have 115, etc. Those elements are taken. Okay. Of course, at the beginning there are 10. So what do? Here we start with an empty list. We travel all elements of the other list, of the main list. And for some elements of that list, we append to the new created empty list. Okay. So in tomorrow's lab, there is a question in which you will do something similar to this one. But instead of doing it like this, you will have a function, let's say def, let's say ABCD. Let's take an LST parameter or A parameter A. Okay, let me put here some tabs here. And of course, after doing this, return LST, of course, not in LST, in A. Okay. So what we will do, let's copy this from here. Let's take here. In tomorrow's lab, you will have something like that. Of course, here I just put A. It could be something else. Okay, let me leave it as an LST. For each element, let's in the here, what does do? Return a new list that are divisible by 5. Okay. Which is made by the elements of the original list, of the parameter list, which are divisible by 5. Here I have, for example, A. Then I have B is equal to A, B, C, D of A. I have my list here, A, which is those elements. Then I call this method and I give the list. That list is given to the method. And then this method creates a new list, LST2, and returns the list. So ABCD function gives me a list. And when I print B, I'll have the same result. Okay. Oh, sorry. What is the problem? I made something wrong, probably. This is A, B, C, D. Of course, it takes A, LST. If we, of course, I return the original list. Okay. I should return the new created list. Okay. The error was here. I should create the new created list. I just returned the original list. That's why I've seen the same thing. Okay, so tomorrow you will have something like that. It will not be divisible by 5, but it will be something else. But the principle is the same. you create a new list. You process every element of the original list. If some condition is true, then you append that element to the new list, and at the end you return the new list. So this is the main philosophy, the main principle for that kind of things. We are just filtering some of the elements, or we are taking some of the elements from the list. Okay. So tomorrow in the lab you will have something similar to this one. I wish you success in your tomorrow's lab, and tomorrow evening I will continue with more list subjects, and I will explain to you the list methods, and I will solve as well lots of more exercises about lists. Any questions about the things that I've explained so far? By the way, I have put in CS101 in LMS in the, the instructive Python programs area folder. Here there are several list programs. The list one, A06 list1.py is the program that I've shown you today. Okay, empty list, create list from elements, blah blah. This is the first program. You can access it from here. There are more programs here, but start with this one. If you understand the first one, then that's enough for today. Okay. If you don't have any questions, then we will stop our lecture.